Maybe the first question from a leadership perspective is board president, which I'm the board president, Mark's the manager, and manager. What what were some of the sparks concerns that helped you recognize that Columinate's efforts around DEI needed to expand, go deeper? I suspect that Mark and I will have different perspectives on this because we're obviously different people. For me, I don't think of it as necessarily one spark, but many things, many probably experiences that in the moment I wasn't necessarily even aware of, but that over time create a kind of energy or a kind of understanding. But I would say if I want to highlight a couple things, going back years, so I would maybe even say like going back a decade. Inspirational conversation from my colleagues, team members that were really from a place of, I'm gonna characterize those comments as wanting to become more self-aware and wanting to question status quo. To me, that's a very vivid memory in my mind. Those having those type of conversations and the tension. And so there's that. There's also the tension and pushback that I think that caused. That's compelling because I think tension is often a source of insight. And so that's one memory I want to raise up.
Our consulting group, we have always felt an identity as like a community, and as a community, I think we really respect the diverse perspectives of everyone in it, and also kind of how we connect with our client communities. And I think your decade kind of framing, Todd, is pretty good. That I can recall like intentional kind of study groups and self-reflective groups and workshops and activities that were really inspired by the initiative of certain individuals that wanted to kind of bring the conversation forward within the community to kind of enrich the group and to also learn from each other about where we were all kind of coming from on certain topics. So it's been pretty long standing, and yet also in the, let's say the last 5 years, the last few years, a more intentional, how do we really want to work with this, the priority of diversifying our own organization and doing systems checks and bias checks and all the things that are necessary to really lift up difference, to really empower our whole community to kind of be different as we move forward than how we have been in the past.
Yeah, and that's interesting, the intentionality aspect to it, because like to me in the early many years ago, conversations that were it's not like the conversations that were happening were not intentional, but they were emerging, and so you have this stuff that's kind of just kind of popping up, and then there's I think when many organizations there's this thing, what do we do with this? Sometimes that energy is so intense for whatever reason that the tendency is to kind of like push it down or try to control it in some kind of way. And as I'm thinking back on our journey, there were certainly those types of maybe urges, but what actually ended up happening was very different, was very much about let's feed this energy and let's do some learning. Let's really try to understand more about ourselves, more about our organization, and understand possibilities.
Looking back at a few milestones of kind of the learning journey, if you want to call it. And, one thing that happened in our organization was Jade Barker and Pat Cumby did a special project that was Everyone Welcome ? And it was a project that resulted in a series of essays that were harvested from people active in the food co-op movement, really to just do how has race shown up in the food co-op movement. I think another kind of data point for me was when George Floyd was murdered. and there was so much tension and outrage, and that was certainly showed up in people's own communities. But internally, it was also a time when, oh, it's like, hey, how are we ourselves processing this, and how is it affecting us personally and our work, and all of that. And I think that the abolitionist challenge that LaDonna put together was really a call to action that kind of came out of that moment in history. That was, hey, folks, built into cooperation are these principles and values that could lead to important change in the world if we actually embrace some of the realities that we all exist in. And for me, organizationally, those were kind of milestones of what does it look like to not only be a community where we're talking about these things internally, but also how are we showing up in a change agent kind of role of bringing new tools and resources to our client community. So those are some key, kind of key data points for me in terms of, looking back. And if I could layer on another one, right, we also asked the question, who are we now and who do we want to be as we go through the future? And we really intentionally said, let's become more diverse. Let's study how we're organized. Let's invite people of different color and different backgrounds into our group. How do we actually accomplish that and be intentional about it? If you're just going on the path of least resistance in terms of what happens in the future, it's like it could be, well, like that, none of that would happen. You just get what you get. And we've been saying, oh, we actually really value diversity and equity and inclusion in our organization. How do we embrace it in a way where it's not like a study topic, but it's just part of our DNA and how we operate?
So this is good. So you're actually, I think, moving into the second question, Mark, which is great. As leaders within Columinate, what impact do you hope we will have because of our DEI journey? What will be different in the future and for who? So to me, that approach is very much less about trying to understand what the future is and more about understanding our present state. I think you were alluding to this, Mark, earlier. But what are we now, and then where would we like to go direction wise? I can't help but try to imagine the future because this is I have an imagination. I'm imagining a future where there is more diversity in terms of lived experience, which I think is I equate to knowledge, arguably some of the most powerful knowledge that exists. And that lived experience, that diversity of lived experience being brought to bear to help support the building of solutions, help solving problems, whether in terms of consultants who wish to offer their services, who have a desire to offer their services, or in terms of our staff who support the work of the organization, any way that we can define community internally and or externally in terms of the communities that we mark. What do you think?
I'm recalling a moment in history when one of our board consultants was working with a board that was made up of a rich collection of people of color, and they put our quilt of faces of who was in our group up on the screen, and all of the people in our group were white. And the question was, how will we all relate to your service providers if there's no one in your group who looks like us? And it's like, dang, that's no disrespect in how we got to where we were in that moment in our history, but when we really started intentionally imagining how are we going to evolve, are there desires and intentions that we can bring to our own growth and evolution? in my mind, it's like, well, let's grow and evolve so that the people in our consulting group look like the whole world, look like the communities that we're serving, right? And not be accidentally in any niche.
It not unobtainable, but it does take work. It takes self-awareness. First of all, you have to actually be, wanting to actually turn that light towards yourself, or look in the mirror in a way that probably haven't before. It's not like
Right.
we have an option not to change. The why, you said, so to me, the why question is way more interesting than the why not, because to me the why not is a little bit of like an escape. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, well, why not do it? It's like,
Right.
I mean, if I want to be super honest, I can think of tons of reasons why I would not want to do something super hard and difficult, or that takes energy and effort.
Nice.
You know, but so yeah, so to me, but that why, like, I love how you said that why is alongside as we go about that journey, and that can shift and morph and change as people's understanding changes. So finally, what are things that Columinate's leadership has focused on changing? Things Columinate doesn't do anymore, and new approaches it uses because it's a commitment to inclusion. What areas of the business model are impacted by these changes? So I think for the board, and this is going back a few years, the biggest change was in actually making greater diversity, more inclusion, and increased equity a priority as opposed to an afterthought. I think that there was a specific moment or feeling I can remember when that shifted. So that was from the board perspective, I think that was a significant change, and it still remains a priority, showing up in various ways in how we go about our work. And then also being willing to continually learn. I think that's important for us as a board to actually want to put the time and energy into actually doing that.
Even when you're a high performing team and you really have your eye on like how to do the work, sometimes you can only take your work to the outer range of what that group is capable of doing on its own, and it's super helpful to have somebody riding alongside, nudging, poking, asking framing questions that help you stretch. And I think a lot of the C-Build experience has been like that. And what I'm relating to your question, Todd, is the idea of having outside support for the journey in an organization about how do you stretch and build a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization. One thing I would say is, well, get a guide, have some help.
I do think Columinate is at beginning stages, really. I mean, we talked about a decade or maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less of work and thought and intentionality. And yet I do think we're early stages in, this. So I want to highlight that.